Hi Alyssa, it's Crystal again, and I just wanted to go ahead and give you some feedback over your final lesson that you gave over life cycles. Um, so first off, I just wanted to say that you did a great job providing many visuals for your students to sort of establish the purpose of your lesson. You also asked many higher level thinking questions throughout your lesson, and this really helped your students to think deeply about those concepts. Also, I noticed that you had many students interacting with one another, which is great, especially during those group activities that you would have. And yeah, so that was awesome. Like when I say group activities, I mean the card sort that you had them compare. The life cycle one was like 4 stages and the other one was like 3 stages. Anyway, that was great. However, so I think that the students would have benefited maybe with a more explicit explanation of the vocabulary terms. I know that in your lesson plan you had talked about how they were gonna look at these new vocabulary terms that they were gonna be using and like highlighting them in a packet or something, but I wasn't sure like maybe if you decided not to do that anymore because of time purposes or anything, but I didn't really see that in your lesson. I did see that you mentioned the term metamorphosis, like in a informal sort of way when you're talking to a student, but I kind of felt like when you're talking about vocabulary terms, it'd probably be better to just maybe teach whole group that you're talking about these are the new vocabulary terms that we want to be using today, and you would do that like during your explain. So yeah, like you're still gonna have them explore and like explore those new concepts, but after they're done doing the explore part and you do your explain, really just explicitly saying, okay, we noticed this new concept, and well, the name for this change that we noticed is called metamorphosis. So just basically doing that during the explain would have been beneficial. Another thing is that like when you do that with your like explicitly talking about the new vocabulary terms, that's really just beneficial, not just for, all the students, but really for the English language learners in your class. I know that in the textbook it says on page 277, Wright points out that students will need to learn many new vocabulary words for each topic they encounter in science. So that's just, really important for your English language learners. They're already, having to learn this new language, but like really just helping them out by showing them the new vocabulary terms in a really explicit way and showing them this is the context that we would use these vocabulary terms. Let's see. Another thing, I would say that in the future, I think that the students would have benefited from you maybe posting the standards and objectives. You may have posted the standards and objectives and I probably just couldn't see it in the video, but I didn't really see it, so I wasn't sure if you had done that. But it's just a good idea to be posting the lesson objective and really just communicating it with the students. I know that in the beginning of the video you had talked about like, okay, so today we're going to be comparing the life cycle of this insect to this insect, which is fine to like let them sort of have an idea, but it's also just good to have the lesson objective written and talked about and discussed with the students at the beginning of the lesson, just to give them that kind of like a roadmap, so that way, while they're doing activities during the lesson, they don't feel like, oh, like what's the point of, why do I have to do this or whatever. That way they kind of know, oh, okay, I'm doing this activity because it relates to the lesson objective and I can see it over there on that wall and I can read that we're focusing on comparing the life cycle of the butterfly to the whatever. So that just would have been great. let's see. But yeah, mostly I thought that it was really great, your activities and materials. Just having those students really manipulate those different card sorts that you made. I thought that was great when you had them put them sort of in order, like for the steps of the life cycle. And that was really great because it was an engaging hands-on activity, and they were really just focused in on the lesson, you know. And that really also is beneficial for your English language learners, because when you give them, you know, those activities, you're giving them opportunities to use those new vocabulary terms that they've been learning. So in the textbook on page 279, Wright describes that hands-on activities provide rich language opportunities for students to explore real experiences using purposeful language in a meaningful context. So basically that when you give them those activities, those opportunities to really just use those vocabulary terms that you taught them, then they start to really learn and understand, like, oh, okay, this is how I would use the vocabulary term metamorphosis in this context. So that way, you know, they're really understanding the content. But yeah, mostly like when they're engaged in those interactive activities, they're being engaged in the lesson, and then they feel like they're interested in the learning, which is great. So just to kind of sum up everything, I would say that the thing that I thought was the best, like it was pretty exemplary, was your activities and materials, because even though, yes, you may not have posted the lesson objective or anything, or really communicated it in a formal way, you could see that when you were writing your lesson plan that your activities and materials were really supportive of your lesson objective, and they were challenging. Having those students really have to understand the life cycle so that way they could put it in order. And then that student-to-student interaction was provided. They could work in groups to make sure that it was in order. And then you also provided students with choices, which was great. At one point you had talked about, okay, you can choose a card, any card from set A, and compare it to a card in set B. And that's great because that gives them student choice, and they feel like they have more of a like independent say on what they get to do. And that really showed that you were incorporating resources that were beyond the school curriculum texts. So that was great. So that would be what I thought you did really exemplary, very well. So on the flip side, I would say that something that you should probably improve on would be your standards and objectives, making sure that the learning objectives are communicated, that they understand, like maybe having them read the lesson objective and then communicate it back to you, maybe in their own words, so that way you know they understand what they're going to be doing that day, and just having them displayed. And then one other thing would be really just going over those vocabulary terms in a explicit way during your explain part, like really getting them whole group. Okay, metamorphosis is the term that we use to explain the change that a butterfly goes through when it changes from this stage to this stage, or whatever context you want to explain it to them. But yeah, just giving them that example or like an illustration, and like labeling those new concepts. But overall, I thought it was pretty well. I did notice that the lesson was a little bit short, and I'm not sure, maybe you were running low on time or something, but yeah, just make sure that, I guess, your students have enough time to really reflect on what they learned that day, whole group, so that way you understand, like, okay, what they got out of the lesson, and see if they really mastered your lesson objective. But overall, pretty good job. So thank you for listening to this video.